You're listening to a download from The Independent in association with BT.
Hello and welcome to the first of 3 SustainIT podcasts brought to you by The Independent. I'm Hamish McRae, the Chief Economic Commentator on The Independent, and with me are my colleagues Michael McCarthy, our Environment Editor, and Jeremy Warner, our Business Editor. We're going to talk about some of the issues surrounding IT and the environment. And I think we should start with the question of the way in which IT can help move us towards a more sustainable economy, but also some of the costs that carries as well. My own view is that IT, the new technologies in general, are one of the few weapons we have whereby the world can increase its standard of living without putting too heavy a further footprint on the planet. It's happening already. Simple things like reorganising the trucking of supermarkets so the people delivering the stuff to the markets don't have to make so many calls and move it with light traffic rather than heavy traffic. Or indeed home working, one other way in which you substitute an electronic transfer than a physical one. So I think it is one of the weapons, and maybe the chief weapon we have to increase our living standards, which we will want to do in the future, but in a way that doesn't have too heavy a footprint.
I agree with that. Clearly, there's no doubt that the old fume-belching smokestack industries that have dotted Britain since the Industrial Revolution 200 years ago were enormously polluting in their output. I had a friend as a boy whose father owned a factory on the upper reaches of the River Irwell in Lancashire, and the River Irwell went into his father's factory as a tumbling stream, crystal clear, and it came out orange on the other side. And there's no doubt that the weight of pollution that heavy industry has put on the environment in industrialised countries is enormous, and most of that has gone. And it is in fact the case that British rivers, for example, are cleaner now than they have been in general since the Industrial Revolution. So I agree with what you say, Hamish, but I think it's worth bearing in mind that there is nearly always a price to pay for almost any sort of human activity. We think of man being in harmony with the environment when he was a hunter-gatherer, but in fact that's not the case. Man modified the environment enormously and has done ever since he broke out of being an ape and learned to use fire and learned to use throwing weapons. The history of humankind has been a long history of environmental degradation. And the point I'm making is that even though new technologies are clearly far more benign than the old technologies with regard to the environment, there is too a price to be paid. One of the prices to be paid is the enormous electricity use that the vast amount of IT power we now have across the world involves. Another, for example, is the e-waste or electronic waste that we have, which is now maybe 50,000 tonnes a year of computer hardware, which is just thrown away by people in the West and often out of sight and out of mind.
The idea of the weightless, knowledge-based, post-industrial economy is great in many respects, but it uses an awful lot of electricity. In fact, according to many projections, it may even already be using much more electricity than aviation, which produces lots of protests about the environmental damage that aviation is doing to the planet, and it's growing much more rapidly.
I do agree also with Hamish that new technologies actually can be used to make the impact of man on the planet less severe. A good example of this is a lot of the thinking that's going on about not only electricity generation but electricity distribution. There's one idea in particular which is the smart grid. At the moment we just pump the stuff out down wires and people use it, and nearly always people use too much. They leave the kettle on for too long, or they have the tumble dryer on a boiling hot day or whatever. And a particularly interesting idea is the fact that we could use computer technology on an interactive way, in the way in which the internet is interactive with us, to fine-tune our electricity demand right down to very, very small tolerances. So that, for example, when your tumble dryer is pumping away on a boiling hot day, there may be a sensor in there that will actually lower the temperature of the tumble dryer because it doesn't need it quite so much. Or, for example, when you have your electric car and you charge up your electric car and you find that you don't quite need all the charge, you can sell that back to the grid instantly.